Starting with this episode, for the next few episodes, we are going to deal with some of the most widely discussed, debated issues applicable to the tribal people. First, the term poverty. Poverty is, all said and done, an economic concept, measurable in terms of monetary parameters. Once this is accepted, it becomes a little tricky to apply it in the case of tribal people. For one thing, they have always lived through generations in a non-monetary economy. There is another important dimension with respect to tribal people. Poverty, all said and done, is a relative concept. People living in the tribes, unless they compare themselves after coming into contact with the non-tribals, would not even realize that they are living in conditions called poverty, because they have always lived in the natural environment, accepting whatever was available within the environment where they were living through generations, accepting whatever was there as the naturally given ones. So, they would not even think that they were poor unless they compared themselves with things that other people, non-tribals, possessed, which they thought they could also be possessing. So, therefore, the concept of poverty can be applied to the tribal people only in relation to the interactions with the non-tribal people. I said earlier that poverty as applied to tribal people is a tricky exercise. Unless the tribal people come into contact with the non-tribal people under monetary economy, and when they see the non-tribal people possessing certain things which they could consider they could also be possessing in order to maintain a better kind of life, they would not realize that they are poor, because they always lived for generations in the natural environment, accepting whatever was available around them as naturally given to them. They would not even realize that they are poor. When it comes to the tribal people as applicable to the Indian situation, there are other related problems that come into picture. Illiteracy. In fact, when it comes to the Indian situation, you need not separately say who are the poorest people and who are the tribal people. Most poor people are the tribal people in India. When it comes to ethnicity, the people who are poor belong to certain ethnic stocks, whether you refer to them as scheduled castes or scheduled tribes. Normally, the poorer people are darker in complexion. They are toiling the whole day in the hot sun. When it comes to religion, most tribal people, most poor people are having a single god or a goddess, sometimes not even in the human form, some kind of a symbol. Even the totemic pole, as I was referring to much earlier, could be their god or goddess. When it comes to occupation, they are all skilled only in their own lifestyle. Once they are taken out of their tribal situation, they could be considered as mostly unskilled. That means only manual labor is usable. If you look at poverty, ill health, indebtedness and unemployment as well as underemployment, all these four aspects form together a vicious circle. You can start within this vicious circle at any point, go round and round, you will find one is feeding the other. Poverty feeding to ill health feeding to indebtedness, indebtedness feeding to unemployment or underemployment, and back to poverty. That means, within this vicious circle, the tribal people go round and round, caught in this web with no way out. Now, indebtedness again is something that tribal people came into in their lives only after they entered the interaction with the non-tribal people. Non-tribal people, in perfect contrast to the tribal way of life, are living a monetary economy. So, when a tribal person comes into contact with a non-tribal person, gets into transactions with the non-tribal person, for the first time he comes into monetary dealings. Not only understanding what exactly it means, he would not know the value of what is being transacted, because in the non-monetary economy, average tribal people have lived with the barter exchange, where the value of what is being exchanged is based on the need for it and not on the quality or quantity. Now, when the tribal people get into the interaction with the non-tribal people, the equation is very, very direct, which they have never experienced in their lives within the tribal communities. The irony of tribal existence is that they are living in rich areas, rich in terms of, say, the forest products and whatever available in the forest, rich in terms of the minerals that are available. In fact, the people living in the forest find that the variety of wood that they never bothered about much now find that they are valuable, like sandalwood for instance, teak for instance. People living in the forest areas, the tribals would never visualize the importance of all this unless the non-tribals come into picture. Think of the tribal people living atop the hills and the mountains, which contain lot of ores, minerals and also rocks, which some of them are very, very meaningful and very, very important for the non-tribal people, like granite for instance. Now, quarrying starts, mining starts. What happens to the tribal people? Tribal people within their limited technology never almost bothered about the value of these things. Now, the non-tribal person with advanced technology would always visualize something is getting wasted. Lot of rich resources available in the middle of which tribal people are living in subsistence economy, they do not know the value of what is lying around. So, the monetary dimension of the non-tribal world drives them into the tribal areas with a kind of an approach of making fuller use of the resources that are available there through mining, through deforestation. Just imagine, through quarrying. Just imagine how the tribal people are getting affected. What is to be done with the tribal people? Now, tribal people become a hindrance for the programs of the non-tribal people, whether these non-tribal people are coming in the garb of contractors to the area or they are coming in the garb of government servants, government officials. All of them would regard tribal people as a block, as a hindrance, as a hazard in the program of making very good use of the rich resources available in the area. Now, what happens then when these people come into this area for exploiting the resources that are available in plenty? Something needs to be done. How do you go about? Either take the tribal people out of the situation, away from there, or try to give them some kind of education so that they can realize the value of it. Now, that brings us to the most important dimension of tribal life in modern times, that is the concept of education. Just imagine the term education, which is a very, very broad based concept. Education simply means an all round development of a human being. Now, what has happened in the governmental programs is education is completely equated with literacy. After all, literacy is a very minor part of larger broad canvas of education. Literacy simply means the ability to read and write a certain language. Just imagine the plight of the tribal people who simply had some kind of a communication system that did not involve written language at all. Now, if you want to educate the tribal people, how do you go about? We went in most programs in the name of literacy, trying to give them the script. Just imagine the plight of an adult tribal who has lived all his life till this particular moment using a communicative language which has no script. Now, you want to introduce the script. What kind of a script? Whether it has something to do with the communication system that the tribal people have been using or not, it does not matter. But we need to put them into this literacy, because the system of governance, the system of development and the system of implementing the programs demands that tribal people come to know some kind of writing. There comes the concept of functional literacy. People in the tribal areas are made functionally literate in a language which is alien to them. however comparable it is to the communication system they had. Can you imagine the tribal people have lived in such a way, including in India, many tribals do not have the word in their dialect for future. They do not have a word for tomorrow, because they lived all the time in the present. Just imagine such tribal people being introduced to a language in the written form which they did not know anything about. In fact, it is almost like a rural man, say in Tamil Nadu, who knows how to write even Tamil, being introduced to English. This was the plight of the adults in the tribal areas when they were introduced into this literacy. What is the modicum of literacy? Did the tribal people need it? Absolutely not. Tribal people never bothered about it. If probably tribal people bothered about literacy, perhaps they would have developed some kind of a script for their own communication. They did not need it. Then who needed the tribal people to be literate? The programmers needed, the people implemented the programs needed, the non-tribal people needed. And why did they introduce this? Because they needed something in black and white for their transactions. Something written in black and white by the tribal person under functional literacy, which the tribal person did not understand at all. Therefore, in its own unique style, introduction of literacy has played an additional implement in the hands of the non-tribal people in exploiting the tribal people. Now, look at the other dimension, the paradox of the educated tribals. If a young adult, man or woman, boy or girl in the tribal area gets educated, comes up to a certain level of learning the art of reading and writing, the person now starts believing that he or she does not belong to the community. I am different, I am something different, I cannot go back to the tribal community for a life. Now, look at the tribal community, the educated person among themselves who now gets literacy is considered something alien. So, this is the paradox of educated tribals. The parents who are illiterate totally, now when their sons and daughters get educated, they are afraid that sooner or later they are going to lose them from their family structure, they are going to lose them from the community. It is a very, very interesting concept, very, very impractically applied in the case of India when it comes to tribals. But anyway, literacy or education is a question that has to be answered. In fact, in one word, tribal people do not need literacy, they need education. They need to be educated about their rights. They need to be educated as to how to go about solving their unique problems, particularly after they came into contact with the non-tribal people. They need to be educated as to whom to approach for solving their problems. They need to be educated as to the different programs that are available for their own development. Development, once again, is something very, very foreign for the tribal people. Earlier I said that there are certain tribes even in India who do not have a term in their vocabulary for future and tomorrow. Then where is the question of development? Where is the question of progress? Now, all this will have to be put into the minds of the tribal people through education, not necessarily literacy. Now comes to the most crucial aspect of the different programs that are being implemented in the tribal areas. Who owns the program? Ideally speaking, the tribal people in whose name the development programs are being run, they must be owning the program. Absolutely not. This is not how it happens. Think of the rehabilitated tribals. Now, look at the tribals who get evicted from an area where they have been living for generations. In fact, if you think of the forest based tribals, tribals living on top of hills and mountains, they do not know that there is a world beyond their area of existence. Now, they are being rehabilitated, put into a different area which is foreign to them. Everything around looks new, not necessarily only the people, the whole environment is new, the whole way of interaction is new. And imagine the concept of rehabilitation.